standing up for truth and standing up for principles is a responsibility that we all have. And whether that's in church, whether that's out in public, wherever that is, that's a responsibility that we're all given.
We are Saints in the South, your source for gospel growth and good times. All right, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Saints in the South. Today, we have a special guest on with us, Greg Matsen with Quick Media. And so, Greg, good to have you.
Yeah, appreciate the invitation.
Very, very good. If you would just take a couple minutes and introduce yourself to our audience, maybe a little bit of your background, your interest, and how you got started with the podcast and a few things like that.
Yeah, so I started a little over 4 years ago. Kind of like you, I started with Come Follow Me right when that program started. I've got kind of a system of what I call interpreters of how to understand the scriptures a little more. It brings in history, culture, and ritual that I'm familiar with. And so I do this Come Follow Me series based on these interpreters and use those to help people understand what's going on. My original idea, though, was to be more of a radio show. I did a little radio when I was much younger and talk more about cultural issues and current events. And so, but my wife said, no, you're doing Come Follow Me. And so so I went ahead with that and I did that. And, but over time I just kind of couldn't hold back and and started to go into the other stuff and I still do the Come Follow Me, but we're probably like 90% cultural issues.
Yeah, so, awesome. But I've been told I have a face for radio.
What's that?
I said I've been told I have a face for radio.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well,
you do.
So anyway, it's started fairly slow with the Come Follow Me, but really enjoyed that. I've got a book coming out a couple months on these interpreters and scripture study. It's something really important to me. And now we're roughly 40,000 listeners between YouTube and the podcast, and growing quickly. So
yeah, very good. Yeah, well, you do a good job out there. You as far as sharing the message and really explaining the thought process, from a gospel perspective on those cultural issues. And we're definitely seeing those come to the forefront more and more these days. And so that was one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on the show here. We started out with Come Follow Me, but are looking to expand the conversation as well. Here in the South, it's just different. It's a little different, being a Latter-day Saint here in the South than it is out West. And so that's kind of some of the things that we want to talk to you about, the church out West, the church in Utah versus maybe in other parts of the world, and everything. So we'll go ahead and kick off with maybe our first topic here. The first one is, you put out a video a little while ago, but it was on why people are leaving the church, and you talked about how in years past it's more of church history related issues, issues with the Pearl of Great Price, or translating the Book of Mormon, the gold plates, or polygamy and things like that, and whereas now it's more of a ideological type things, so if you could just maybe expound upon that a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about what do we see out here versus what we see out West and so forth. So if you could just maybe touch on that.
Yeah, so things have changed quite a bit in reasoning behind leaving the church. It's kind of funny because I put that out and I have a lot of people still coming back, especially people who have left, and say, no, it still is the church history and it's these things. And it's not like that doesn't happen, right? People don't go through that. And for me, they kind of peel back the first layer of the onion, and it's not what the primary told them, and so they have a hard time with this like cognitive dissonance. They're like, this doesn't match, and some people struggle with that, and they don't realize sometimes that there are more layers that you still need to pull back to really understand things. But what has happened is the shift has happened in our culture, where what I call the religion of academia has pushed forward these new ideologies that have really been around for codified for a couple hundred years, but they have to do with what you call critical theory, which is basically dividing everything up into oppressor and oppressee, or oppressor and victim, and identity. And so whether it's race or it's sexual orientation, it can be class, it can be a number of different things. But what's happened is this has really permeated our thinking, especially if you've gone to college, and it's created what happens is you start learning about these things, and you start hearing about them on social media, and this identitarianism, which says, look, what's your gender, what's your sexual orientation, what's your race, what's your age, and it starts putting you into a class. And
that's where the intersectionality comes in.
Intersectionality, right, from Kimberly Crenshaw. It's the intersectionality, and you get put up on a rung somewhere on that intersectional ladder, and it's all based on victimhood. And so the problem is that the gospel doesn't work that way. So if you're a member of the church and you're exposed to this kind of critical theory, and your mind starts to change, and you start to take on this worldview, then it's going to naturally combat against the gospel. It's just naturally going to go against it. And so what happens eventually is you start seeing oppressor and victim in everything, and naturally you're going to start applying that to the church. And so you start applying that to the church, and it's like, okay, I've got basically 15 white men, they're old men, and there's a patriarchy, and you try and apply that now to the church history. And so you start viewing things very differently within the church. And so you start off with these other, like anti-racism and critical race theory and sexual orientation and all these other things, but then it almost always ends up going to the church, because that's part of your life, right? It's an authority figure. And so if you go back and look at, I want to say 2014, they do this, I think, every 10 years. The Pew survey poll in religion in 2014, you see some of the reasoning behind why people are starting to leave their faith. And you see this, we've had a decline for quite some time in all of religion, especially Christianity. And it's hardly mentioned about things about LGBTQ issues. It's there, but it's not very big at all. And then you move a little bit further on, and there's a book that came out in 2019 by Jana Reese, and she did some larger surveys, and she's specific with Latter-day Saints, and she starts pulling in these reasonings. You start seeing them now showing up of why people are leaving the church, and this identitarianism, sexual orientation, issues with gender, and they're all critical theory issues. They start popping up, and you start seeing this more and more. And then more recently, just a couple of years ago, I'm privy to a pretty large survey that was done for the church on YSAs and the reasoning for them leaving the church and the inactivity. And so I saw some things there also. And they all of these ideologies and their growth and that cultural shift goes right along with those YSAs that are leaving the church. And it's it's correlated between the two. And then I have now up to a little over 15 different YSA bishops that I've spoken to, and in general terms, they give me some of the issues that they see in talking to some of the youth or the YSAs, and their activity rates and a number of things like that. And it all, for me, it all correlates. It's all the same thing, where the number one, if it's not the number one issue with them, it's the number one growing issue, has to do with this issue of identity and critical theory. It's feminism and gender, it's race, it's sexual orientation and the history of the church, and does the church support that, and temple marriage and these different things. And that is what, and then of course the feedback that I get from everyone and having the same problems within their families of these issues popping up. And so, yeah, so that's, having taken all that, to me, I'm trying to make a statement with that video saying, look, this is what is happening, and this is the direction that things are going. And it's not so much just church history anymore. It's not so much how did Joseph Smith translate the Book of Abraham. It's ideological today.
Yeah, it's far more fundamental than that now. Mm-hmm. That's something I feel like most people probably have this similar goals in mind of what we want. We all want people to get along, and we want to, people to have equal opportunities and things like that. But it's a completely different paradigm that those people are working with of their approach to try to reach these goals. And that's in my opinion problematic, because I think there's a lot of really legitimate critiques of this entire worldview, but it's become so pervasive within academia that it's almost impossible to critique it now. And if you do try to critique any of these ideas, then you're just labeled as a whatever, racist, misogynist, this, that, the other. You're just part of the patriarchy, especially, which is the most troublesome aspect to me personally, is that, for me even, it's like, oh, you're just a white male, so automatically your voice doesn't matter. And that I don't understand how people cannot see how problematic that is. And, it's like, it's no different than if than if 100 years ago, someone was speaking, they say, oh, well, you're just a black male, so you're this, so your voice doesn't matter. It's wrong no matter how you look at it. And it seems like, to me, rather than learning from the mistakes of history, we're kind of just repeating the mistakes in different directions, which is kind of how it appears to me anyway.
Yeah, it's like a pendulum. It's just going the other direction. And exactly. It's part of the problem with that, and the reason that's coming up, in my view, is because of postmodernism, right? Which basically says there's no core truth. There's no absolute truth. There's no objective truth. And so when you take away objective truth, then it's what's your experience versus my experience. What's your truth, your lived experience versus what my truth is. And if I want my truth to prevail, then I have to put you down, right? Because there's nothing else that we're assimilating to. There's no truth that we're both trying to get to any longer. And that's why logic is being pulled out of it also, right? Logic and reason is being pulled out. It doesn't work as much anymore. When you have arguments with someone who has this what I would say ideological possession, it's you try and reason, it doesn't work. It's just because they reject reason. Yeah. It's about their feelings, and it's about their lived experience, and that's their truth. And it's a very dangerous sandlot to play in. It really is.
So how are you able to have a conversation, or are you able to have a productive conversation with someone who has that thought process, that my truth is my truth?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. But if someone is a member of the church, for example, then what I try to do, I think the best approach to that is to try and show, you ask questions, do you have a belief in Jesus Christ? Do you believe that he died for you and is your savior? Or is, what are the basic doctrines of the church, and do these ideologies work within this? Because they don't. Because if you contrast them, if you can take everything and look at equity versus equality, for example. If I look at equality of opportunity, which the Lord definitely wants, he wants you to have agency. That's a core doctrine of Latter-day Saint doctrine is agency. I mean, even in the Garden of Eden, he's not going to stop Adam and Eve. right? It's
Right.
like, no, you get to choose what you want. Well, if we have agency, the absolute result of agency is variability of outcome. Because people are going to choose unwisely, they're going to choose selfishly, they're going to choose righteously, they're going to have, we're everywhere on the spectrum. And that's why there's three kingdoms at the end. Right? Is there's a different outcome for everyone based on what you choose and what you really want and what you want to do. And equity, which is really at the core of critical theory and a lot of these ideologies, what I call the gospel of equity, is saying, no, we're going to force the outcome into the sameness. But see, if you do that, the only way that works is to reduce or eliminate agency.
Yes. That's why I see equity through the lens of the gospel, as that was Lucifer's plan. That was Satan's plan.
Sure. Absolutely. So it's like, okay, so if I can talk between those two things, now that doesn't mean there's something's going to be resolved from it, or I can change someone's mind, but that's just an idea of, okay, let's talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion means. What does equity really mean, and how does that apply with the gospel principle? And can I contrast the two? I think that's the best approach.
And we've seen, and you've referenced this as well on that particular video, but talking about President Nelson's coming out with the our identity, as first as a child of God, right? And then the what were the second two? Covenant keeping people,
covenant.
Child of the covenant,
and then disciple of Christ,
and then disciple of Christ, right? And trying to bring everybody kind of back to what we truly should be worried about as far as what we identify as. And that's those three items there.
Well, it's encouraging, right? Because you're like, okay, they do have an understanding, some degree, of what's happening out there.
Right.
I mean, if they're talking, because it's not just him, others have brought that up. And it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend with General Conference and if they refer to the identity again. But that is the issue to some degree. Well, to a large degree, identity is the issue. And how am I identifying? And see, the thing that's brilliant about what he did there, I call it President Nelson's identity hierarchy, because he has those three, and then he says every other label and identity comes down below this, because we're a lot of things. I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm an American. I've got all these other labels, but none of them matter as much as those top three. And what's happening in the culture is we're trying to raise those other lesser labels and identities above those other three. We're trying to put it all on its head and say, this is what is most important, whether it's my sexual orientation, my race, my gender. It's like, no, none of those are as important. And when we focus on those things, which is what these ideologies want you to do, all of those issues put you into a collective that is not the collective of God. So I've got a collective of my race. I've got a collective of my gender. I've got a collective of being heterosexual. I've got a they want to put you and assign you into a group, whereas the other three are saying, as a child of God, you are an individual with a very specific relationship with your Heavenly Father. Right. So that's, you're an individual. And number two, you're a child of the covenant. It means your agency. You have chosen to hold on to the covenants. And that is what an identity of agency, an identity of choice, which is also individualistic. Right. And a disciple of Christ is, I'm trying to follow him, where again, that's my choices. And so that's, you can see this conflict between these other collectives that push against the idea of agency and your identity as a child of God. They're there, but they're not as important.
Yeah. It's just been an interesting thing for me, and I think maybe for Kenny and Michael as well, from being living in the South. And I mean, obviously we have people, that leave the church down here as well, for varying reasons and everything. But to watch and see from afar this quote unquote Mormon exit that has taken place, out in, Utah, Idaho, and so forth. I don't know. It's just kind of mind boggling, really, just to kind of sit back and see that taking place. It's like, what's going on out West is kind of the thought process, and of course we're down here in the South, we're a little slower, right? So it takes a little bit of time to work its way down here.
Yeah, my thought is, though, that the devil is working overtime out West. Basically, I think I'm seeing a lot of stuff happening out there. There's these all school drag shows and things that are going on in Utah, things that would be unthinkable down here, things that would never. I mean, that most people who live down here in the Southeast U.S. probably have never even heard of, and if somebody tried to propose these ideas, would just be. It wouldn't fly. No way, no how. Absolutely not. It would be so utterly and completely ridiculous that no one would give it a thought, except for a small minority. And to think that these kind of ideas are really permeating the culture in the, in the areas that are, have such a high concentration of the Latter-day Saint population is really strange. It's very weird for us to kind of be watching.
It's almost a snowball effect. Once somebody starts kind of, putting that out there, I think other people become more comfortable with also kind of jumping on that snowball a little bit. And it just kind of continues to grow and grow.
Yeah. And I think there's, I'm actually not in Utah, but I think especially in that Intermountain area, right? So if you go to, Idaho, Utah, coming down into areas of Arizona, there's definitely more of a different culture there. I mean, it's a Mormon culture. And I think that culture, which does somewhat go out from there and other places, but that culture is especially susceptible to these ideas and these ideologies because it is in many ways, you live as a collective. And, I'm not used to that. I didn't grow up that way. I was, I had, 30 members of the church in my high school, maybe out of, 2000. And
oh gosh, I think I had maybe 3 in my
high school. Yeah. Okay. And so, it's just different. I grew up with an understanding of I'm different. And that's okay. And in fact, it's celebrated in a sense of I need to stand up, and I'm always, I'm always aware that I'm the Mormon guy, right? Growing up. And so you don't have that in that Intermountain West, right? And so it's very different where you're not maybe as inoculated against this opposition that comes in. I'm just thinking out loud here. But the other thing is in the culture, especially there in that culture, it's a very buttoned up culture, right? It's very proper. And really it's very nice. And so when these ideologies come in the guise of tolerance and love and compassion, it tugs at heartstrings, and you're wanting to be accepted in the bigger world. Mormons have always wanted that. I want to be more mainstream. I want to feel more mainstream. And now here's this chance that you could be that. And it's for love and tolerance and we're nice, which I don't, to me is not a virtue. It's not a virtue at all. And
that's right. It's not.
I kindness, fine, but niceness is just, I'm going to push the can down the road because I don't want any conflict. And if I'm going along, if there's no conflict with me, with these ideas that are coming from Babylon, they're secular ideas, right? They are sourced from secularism. Then there's a problem if there's no conflict, right? That means I'm going right along. I'm in the current, and I'm just going right along with the current.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that's where, how much do we put our voice, out there? How much do we stand our ground? Because on one hand, these things are prophesied about. right? But at the same time, I don't think that means that we should just, like you're talking about, stay quiet, and not do anything, or not try and at least, fight and stand up for truth and gospel truth and so forth. So it's that's kind of where, because I tend to be on that nice guy spectrum. I've told these guys here before, I wish I had a little more bite in me. You know what I mean? And that's kind of where I'm wanting to get to, to be willing to put myself out there a little bit, even though it may draw some negative feedback, it may draw some resistance and everything. So.
Yeah, and there's a way to do it, right? You don't need to try and be, as President Nelson has said, get rid of contention. You don't need to be contentious about it,
right?
Like where you're attacking people or you're trying to be right, and
yeah.
But standing up for truth and standing up for principles is a responsibility that we all have, and whether that's in church, whether that's out in public, wherever that is, that's a responsibility that we're all given. And
it's becoming increasingly difficult, unfortunately, though. That's something that I think the silent majority is becoming increasingly silent, because the potential repercussions for speaking up are becoming greater and greater as time goes by.
Yeah, I think that's what I talk about, the spiral of silence, and that spiral is bringing us further and further down as we let it, allow for that to happen, and that's not just us. I mean, we have that definitely in the church. If you go to other Christian churches, it's the same thing. These ideologies are permeating there as well. And I talk to pastors and others, and it's the same thing. They don't speak up enough.
Yeah.
Right. They're not speaking up enough about it either. And it's a problem, because we're and I think it's a distraction, especially in the US, where we have all this privilege of abundance and freedom and all of these blessings that we enjoy. It's almost becomes a distraction.
Yeah.
Of hey, you have to fight for these things. You have to hold on to these things, because otherwise, and be grateful for them, right? You have an attitude of gratitude with this, because if you don't have that attitude of gratitude for everything that we're blessed with, then it's just a matter of you turn to consumption.
Yeah. And
you're consuming drugs, you're consuming entertainment, you're consuming screen time on your phone, you're consuming whatever, and participating in this life of abundance in a way that was kind of like the cycle of pride in the Book of Mormon.
Oh yeah. Also, I want to say really quick.
Go ahead.
Something I want to hit on one of those contrasts that we were talking about between the culture out west and the culture kind of here in the South. Living in the Bible Belt as a Latter-day Saint is a very interesting experience, because it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way. On one hand, most people are from mildly to openly hostile toward us as members of the church. We are viewed with suspicion and distrust often, because they're like, oh, y'all ain't Christians, kind of thing.
Yeah, you're a cult
so
member.
it can be pretty harsh. But on the other hand, the culture in the South is still very much based on basic Christian conservative principles. And like you said, you were talking about how these principles are seeping into other denominations. Well, in the South, there's a lot of pushback. As a matter of fact, there's a large Methodist church in our hometown here that is in the middle of a pretty large battle it's a large church that has been here for like 100 years, and they are in the middle of trying to take themselves away from what is their convention, the Methodist, the United Methodist Church, as a worldwide governing body. Like they are, because the Methodist Church is embracing these kind of ideologies like you were talking about, and that the churches here are like, no sir, that's not the gospel, that's not what we believe in. And so they're pulling away from their denominations. There's Baptist churches, I've even heard of friction with the Southern Baptist Convention. Even there's so many. The churches here are really to their
Pushing back.
benefit, I have to say they're strong in standing for what they believe in. And they don't put up with that nonsense.
I think that you're going to see, and maybe it will be geographic, but you're going to see more and more of that type of splitting.
Yeah.
And it's, the Church of England, for example, just took on gay marriage. And you see that they've got affiliates and people that belong to them that are not in England, or they're ethnic and they're in England, but they're an ethnic church that are affiliated with the Church of England, right? But there are these other ethnicities outside of the West that have these affiliations with Western churches. They're very conservative.
Yes.
You go to Africa, they're very conservative. You go to the Philippines, they're very conservative. And so you have these attachments, and now you have a lot of these churches that are now same thing. They're pulling away from the Church of England. They're saying, no, we're no longer involved with you. This is no longer going to happen. And you have SBC, in 2019, they had resolution number 9 that brought in critical race theory as a way to filter, to look at scripture, right? A new worldview of looking at scripture. They have pushed back on that, but there are those that want that there, right? They want that there. And so I think with Christianity as a whole, we saw the division of the Methodist Church. We've seen other divisions. There's going to be a lot more, and it's going to be based on these ideologies. It's going to be on the tenets of critical theory, identitarianism, the religion of academia. That's the line that's going to split. My concern is with the church, our church, right? And what can happen there. And you may have much more of a stronghold there in the South, but in other places, that's what I am afraid of. Even when I talk about BYU and what's creeping in there and things that have happened there, and which, by the way, they are doing quite a bit of change on. But that's what I'm worried about. These ideologies are not compatible with the doctrine of Christ.
Do you think the change in leadership there with BYU going to Shane Reese come May 1st, do you think that's part of that at all?
Well, I don't know about the change itself. I think that, for example, President Worthen had been there 9 years. That's kind of like their time frame that you're usually there. So I don't think that they would have made a change because of that at that level. But I do think that Shane Reese is the right guy. And I think that I know that there are several policies and procedures that BYU has been putting into place over the last 2 years, but last year and a half especially, to change things. Now, we may not see all of that in the news. Most people, when I do these broadcasts on BYU, it's like they want to bring out the torches and get rid of the professors. It's like fire the professor, and it's like, that's not going to do anything. That does nothing. It might make you feel good that there's a change but that's not what I'm trying to do. It's the changes that need to happen are so much deeper and so much more problematic and complex than a number of professors that are there. You fire a professor, they're just going to bring another one in. It's the same. It's not going to make any difference unless you're changing things on the back end that will change the environment, will change who you're hiring, that will focus minds on the gospel and gospel teaching and the incompatibility of the the DEI of the world. Elder Gilbert, who is the head over all CES, right? All the church education system. And he's come right out and said, look, the diversity, equity, and inclusion that is going to be happening at BYU is not the diversity, equity, inclusion of the world. It is not the DEI of the world. We are not going to follow suit with that because it's not compatible. And so that's where you get, again, that's that division. People that want that other DEI, that critical social justice, it's as long as we're standing firm on that, they're not going to get it.
Well,
But
maybe
they've
I'm
had
just
a lot of wins.
maybe I'm just being naive here, and I don't completely understand. But um, I mean, I guess I'm just like, I don't understand the whole thing. I don't understand, like, well, if you don't like the culture of this particular school, and what is it, DEI? Is that what you're? Is that the
Mhm.
word? Then go to a different school. I don't understand the need why we have to make, or some people feel like we have to make the whole world into this one thing. I mean, if you don't like something, then I mean, it completely takes away choice. And the thing that bothers me about the whole thing is that they want this whole thing. That as I'm listening to you guys talk about this, they want agency for themselves. They want freedom for themselves. They want their agenda pushed forth, but nobody else's. So they want to be able to do whatever they want without any consequences. And they want to be able to have the freedom, but they don't want you to have the freedom. They want to be able to say, well, this is what I am, and you accept me. But they don't want to accept anyone else, or they don't want to accept anyone that's against them or that doesn't think the same way as them. And that the whole thing in itself, to me, is going to implode on itself, because no one's going to be happy, and in the end no one's going to be accepted. It's just going to be a bunch of individuals that don't like each other and don't agree with each other. And so I maybe I'm being naive. I don't
You
understand
hit
how
the nail on the head. I think it's activism. It's because these people, they're within academia. Activism has become its own virtue. Like, just change. That's, especially, I've seen this a lot. I work in the field of social work, and I have a degree in social work, and I see a lot of this stuff, and I
Yes.
feel like a lot. That's why I said a while earlier, I feel like a lot of us, we have similar end goals in mind, but where we differ the most is the methods that we feel would be most effective to get there. And that's why I disagree strongly with a lot of these current ideologies that I feel are more destructive than helpful. I think eliminating objective truth, eliminating logic and rational thought is not the solution. I strongly disagree with that. I think we can look at history and see where those paths have led humans before.
but they also want to
the only chance we have is being able to speak rationally with each
right,
other.
but they also want to eliminate opinion, right? If
Yes,
your opinion doesn't match mine, then we need to eliminate your opinion because it doesn't match mine. Well, what happens when nobody's opinion is the same?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I
And
being naive? Am
No,
I
you're
being
not being naive
naive?
at all. I think
Who Jacob Hansen, I know, posted gosh, who was it that did the talk on activism? The
Corbett.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
Brother
was
Corbett.
excellent. Absolutely excellent. Yes, I think he knocked it out of the park on that one.
Yeah, ACT. Yeah. So I think, Kenny, I think you're exactly right on the activism side of things. These ideologies, pregnant in them, is activism, right? It's the way it's taught. It's not just, a lot of people say, well, when I talk about BYU, I get a lot of pushback and say, look, these are kids coming out of the nest. They need to be exposed to other ideas. They're just learning. You can't just shelter them. It's like, right. I agree with that 100%. My point is, look, I wish more Marxism was taught. I wish it was taught more so people could say, oh, this is actually what happened in the 20th century.
Yeah.
These are actually the consequences that happened from these ideas. And, oh, by the way, look how
if we
similar
teach the
these ideas are to what we're talking about today and these ideas today. It's like, yeah, open it up. Fine. That's great. But they won't do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a matter of being exposed to new ideas. It's a matter of indoctrination. It's a matter of, it's like, I give the example, I had a world religions course at BYU when I went there, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it, right? With a lot of different ideas and things that I don't espouse, but it was interesting to me. But if all of a sudden, when I get to, I don't know, Sikhism or something, in world religion, the professor all of a sudden starts to say, this is what is right. This is what you need to do. And this, you need to read the books of this. You need to follow these tenets. This is why this is virtuous and right and correct. And anybody who doesn't agree with this is homophobic, racist, or whatever else. That's the problem. because it's even if you read Ibram Kendi, who's the biggest icon of
Yes.
anti-racism and critical race theory out there.
Ibram X. Kendi, yes.
Yeah, it's the same. He will tell you, if you don't agree with this and fight for this style of anti-racism, then you're a racist. So if you're not an activist with these tenets, you're a racist. And that same idea and ideology goes along with sexual orientation or anything else in the intersectional ladder. If you don't push for this, if this doesn't become your worldview, if you don't try for this change, which is really, fist in the air revolution is really what it ends up being, then you're this or you're that, which is just, again, that goes back to the war in heaven. And, Diablo, devil, that means the accuser. That's what it is. And so when you throwing these names at people, they're just accusations. They're not based on logic. They're not based on truth. They're just labels and accusations to try and pull you down.
Modern day McCarthyism.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how I think of it. It really today, being called a racist is I believe exactly the same as being called a communist during McCarthyism. It's the same thing. If someone accused you of being a communist, they didn't have to have any evidence. All they had to do was make an accusation, and your entire career could be ruined. We got to root out the communists, and that's exactly what we have now with racism. Oh, so and so's a racist. Oh, cancel him. What evidence do you have that this person is a racist? It doesn't matter. They're racist because they don't espouse, like you said, like Ibram X. Kendi. His whole philosophy of if you oppose this at all, then you are inherently racist.
Yeah, exactly. So it's called praxis, right? From critical theory, it's called praxis. It's what you do. It's your behavior. And if praxis is not a part of the ideology dies. And so all of these things, whether it's critical race theory in K-12 space or it's identitarianism in universities, they all come packaged with that praxis, with that activism.
And what's their end goal? See, so our end goal is we have an eternal perspective, right? We want to have a strong family and get our family and as many people as possible return to live with our Heavenly Father in celestial glory, right? I mean, that's the end goal. What is their end goal? I have no idea. I mean,
I'm gonna wax a little philosophical here. So if you study these ideologies and you go back into the philosophies that have brought this about, I mean, it's incredible when you go back and you realize how a few individuals in history have a major impact.
Right.
Whether it's war, whether it's, Gandhi, some of these individuals are philosophers and they have a major impact on how we think today. And so through continental philosophy, you've got a certain DNA there that goes from Kant to Hegel and coming up into Marx, right? And then up into Gramsci and then the Adorno and others and Marcuse and
Derrida.
And coming down into Derrida with postmodernism. It's a certain DNA that falls through there. Well, but way back with Hegel, he has something called Aufgehoben or Aufhaben. And what that is basically it's this idea of a utopia. And so the utopia is gained through a dialectic process. The dialectic is real simple, and you'll recognize this. It's today we are at a status quo, right? A thesis. And then what we really are looking for, which is where you get the drive for change, is an antithesis. It's the opposite of where we're at today. And then what you settle for is something in the middle, which is now a synthesis, right? So you've just moved, and if we're looking actually at a political spectrum, you'd say, okay, well, we just moved to the left,
right?
A certain amount, but now this new spot is the new status quo. And as soon as it's gained, I mean, the day it's gained in that synthesis, you now move beyond to the next synthesis, the next antithesis. That's the dialectic process. And the dialectic, its purpose is to move you through truth. So as an example, I can see you three on the screen here. Between me and you three, maybe there's all these perceptions and ideas and things that make me look at you differently than what you really are. And so I need to get rid of those. And that dialectical process brings me to that truth, to Aufgehoben. And that brings me to this new, if we can all just get there, we liberate ourselves through all of that. We liberate ourselves and arrive at this utopia of absolute truth. Okay. That's what is behind all of this. That process and that idea is what is behind all of this. The problem is it's a counterfeit.
Right.
It's a counterfeit to Zion. Right. It's an exact counterfeit to Zion. And the liberation is not, it's not a liberation from sin.
Yeah.
Right. It's a liberation from truth. It's a liberation from the shackles of the oppressors.
Right. Okay,
it's a
right.
liberation from those orders that keep my, what my sexuality is. See, if I can be liberated sexually, then I can be anything I want.
Yeah, right.
And so that's part of that process. It's liberating you from all those things. So the idea is we've got to get to this utopia. And it's not going to stop. And so when you see something happen, like let's say a Republican or something gets voted in the United States as president, all hell breaks loose, because it's like, wait a minute, that process just got interrupted for them, right? And so there's a massive reaction to this of that dialectic process. Wait a minute, we got held off from moving toward that utopia. Anyway, that's a long answer to a short question.
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Basically, you have one side fighting for and surrounding the individual, right? Everything is about the individual and what I want to do, what I want my truth to be. And on the other end, it's all about, right, family, strengthening families, and giving versus creating and having our own will. On our side, we give our will to God. We give that up to our Heavenly Father.
Well, and that's right. But I would say also there's also a perversion of the collective, right? Because there is you can say it's about the individual, but yet they don't want to keep you as an individual. In fact, they want to put you in a collective without your agency, based on immutable characteristics, your race or gender or whatever else it is. Whereas Zion says you must first be an individual. You first must be able to create your own agency or master your own agency. You first must be able to master your own behavior. And when you can do that, then you can move beyond into family.
Okay.
And then now that's a new kind of little collective, but it's based off of my agency. Right. And then I can take from there after the family, and this should be ringing true to everybody who's been through the temple. Once I have family, then I can go to community and go beyond that, right? Which is the law of consecration, which is Zion, which is, okay, now I can go even further, but I don't ever leave the individual behind, right? I don't get rid of that. What Aufgehoben basically is, and what people want to do, and what turns to tyranny, is people want to go. I have what I call the 4 steps or the 4 phases of the priesthood. And the first one is Aaronic, and the first 2 are Aaronic. And the first one is agency. That's the first phase. Mm-hmm. It is our choices, and it's obedience, it's commandments. And then the second one is behavior. It's your behavior. And I call the Aaronic priesthood the priesthood of the individual. And then you move to the Melchizedek priesthood. Well, the Melchizedek priesthood has 2 phases, and that's family and then community, right? Zion. That's there. That's the end. And so you go through those 4 phases of the priesthood without ever leaving the one behind. You'll notice in the sacrament prayers, for example, you'll see that the prayer on the bread mentions commandments, right? Because that's an Aaronic priesthood function. It's an individual function. It's your choices, right? So the problem is those people that want this revolution, they want alcohol and getting this utopia. What they do, you'll see this. You can see this in what happened in the 20th century, whether it was from Hitler or from Lenin and Stalin and Mao and everybody else. They get rid of the bottom three. Mm-hmm. And what are those? That's the individual and your agency. Number two, it is your behavior and your speech. Number two is your speech, right? Your speech and your behavior. That's the icon of the Aaronic priesthood is John the Baptist. He is the one who is out baptizing and crying repentance, his speech in the wilderness. So they get rid of those two. And then the third one they get rid of also, which is family, right? Because what do they want? They want the fourth one without any of the bottom three. They're going to say, no, we are going all the way to number 4, to utopia, to our version of Zion, number 4. But the only way we can get there, because you can't, otherwise it takes time and love and sacrifice and repentance, is to get rid of the other 3. Just get them out of the way.
Yeah.
So you're talking about
the Zion.
You're talking about the Borg from Star Trek.
The Borg.
No, seriously, that's exactly what it sounds like. Did you talk about the collective and getting rid of the individual? And no, we're just going to skip all that. We're just. I mean, I'm not trying to throw science.
Hey, there's some deep philosophical stuff in Star Trek.
I'm just saying, sounds exactly like the Borg, and I don't know about you. I don't want to be a Borg.
Greg, I've actually heard you reference the iron rod and the great and spacious building, talking about the collective and all the individuals there, and then doing, you have a choice, but you don't have a choice, right? So which ultimately gets back to it with all the way back or to the original rebel, Satan. And that's the way he wanted it. He wanted it his way, and we're going to do it this way, and nobody else gets a choice, but you'll like it.
Yeah. Well, what he says, right? He says, but give me all the glory.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It's like, well, the only way you can get to number 4 is tyranny, to push it, to get rid of. The only way you can bypass everything and get to number 4 without that, which is fake, right? You can't do it. It is tyranny. It's the only way it works.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's what we're seeing played out in our culture, in the universities. Yeah, it's a tyrannical administration of these ideologies in such a way that, like I was talking about earlier, there's anybody who even questions, like you can't even. That's the thing that it really is. It's like I know it's kind of sarcastic, but I call it the die religion. DIE, because it is in a sense a religion.
It is.
There's so many of these universities. There's corporations that you have to sign your diversity statement, which is in essence your allegiance to their ideology. It's the same thing as with down here. There's certain churches where you have to sign your allegiance to the oh my goodness, it just drew a blank. What is it? The Nicene Creed. I couldn't get it out for a second. So it's kind of like it's like a perversion of that. It's like like there's, for example, there's a Christian counseling agency down here that one of the things that they require for you to work for them is you have to sign something that pledging your agreeance with allegiance to the Nicene Creed. And so these diversity statements, I don't really see any difference in that. It's essentially just a statement of your allegiance to the ideology above everything. And when you state your allegiance to an ideology, then you have sacrificed independent thought. You've sacrificed your agency. You've sacrificed everything to the good of this higher, you've elevated this ideology to God, essentially.
Yeah. It's like the party. It's
Yeah.
it's like 1984 or the Nazi Party or the Communist Party. It's if you better agree with us or else, because if you don't sign those diversity statements, especially in academia, but in most institutions now in the U.S., then you may have a problem.
Yeah.
Even holding a job.
Wow.
And so it's the change just doesn't come through rifles, right? The change comes through social pressure. And it's like the great and spacious building, everyone with a pointed fingers.
And they're applying that younger and younger.
Yes.
And trying to all the way down to grade school and everything as quickly as possible.
Well, all you have to do is just control the media. And when you control the media and what's going to be spun and what's going to be put out on there, then you control it. You control everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even we were talking about, individual university professors. Professors even aren't allowed to think independently in all the cases anymore. You obviously people like Jordan Peterson, and there was Brett Weinstein, Heather Hying. There's so many of these people that were esteemed professors that just questioned, like, hey, this whole juggernaut that's rolling through right now, maybe, even if you just lightly question, even if you say, maybe this isn't the best idea, maybe we should take a step back and kind of look at these ideas before we just go barreling through with them. Your entire career can be gone. Your livelihood is gone. Your career is gone. You get attacked, and then, the McCarthyism steps in with the, you're a racist and a misogynist or whatever. And the only evidence is that you dared to question. You dared to stand up and say the emperor is naked.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analogy. I've used that before too. The emperor's new clothes that's the world we're living in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Greg, we're coming up on an hour and everything, so we won't keep you anymore. But we greatly appreciate your time coming on with us and sharing some of your thoughts and insights on these cultural topics and everything. But if you would just let everybody know kind of maybe the best way if they want to contact you or the best way to follow you.
And before you go, would you mention a little bit more about your book? I'm curious to know when that's coming out. Definitely.
Yeah. So my deadline is April 15th. So I don't know how much longer it'll be after that. I'm guessing June 1-ish is probably what we're looking at. But yeah, it's a scripture study book that just goes through things that you read all the time and you may not have a full context of what it really means. And like the last week of Jesus's life, what is really happening there? And
awesome. And what is it going to be titled?
Haven't totally settled on it yet, but it's maybe The Interpreters, maybe.
Okay. Very good. And are you self-publishing or you go?
I'm self-publishing on this one. I've had some offers, but for right now, I'm going to self-publish on this one, and we'll probably have some distribution in through some other places that will happen out after after it's published. And then if you want to follow, you can look at YouTube. I'm at Quick Media, CWIC Media. Quick is an old English word that means alive and intelligent. So if you go to a lot of people think it's an acronym. And
I've been wondering about that. So I'm glad you've answered.
Yeah, a lot of people close to me, they say, they capitalize CWIC. It's like, no, it's a word. It's an old English word. It means alive and intelligent. And you go back to like the King James version of being quickened. Your spirit is quickened.
Right. Okay.
Right. If you go further back, you get to CWIC.
Okay.
And so that's what that is. But you can find me at Quick Media on YouTube, Quick Media on any of your podcast apps. We're on there. And then we've got a website with a lot of information on it at Quick Media, CWICmedia.com.
Very good. Very good. Well, we appreciate your time. Good luck out there. Keep spreading the good word like you are. And maybe we can talk to you again sometime.
Well, I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Until next time, y'all keep on striving.